new developments in the Nancy Guthrie case that I want to get to. The FBI Director is now speaking out, Kash Patel, saying that the FBI was kept out of the investigation for 4 days.
Welcome back to Crime Blackline Archive. There are significant new developments in the Nancy Guthrie case, and we are going to get into all of it. Brian Entin has been on the ground with this story since day one, and what has come out this week changes the picture of this investigation in ways that nobody was fully prepared for. Stay with us through everything you are about to hear, and if you are new here, subscribe to Crime Blackline Archive. This is exactly the kind of case we cover. Now let's get into it. The FBI director is speaking out. Kash Patel went on Sean Hannity's podcast and said something that had not been said publicly before, something that reframes the entire early stage of this investigation. He said the FBI was kept out of the Nancy Guthrie case for 4 days. 4 full days. That is not a minor administrative detail. That is not a bureaucratic footnote. In a missing persons case, particularly one involving an elderly woman taken from her home in the middle of the night, the first 48 hours are considered the most critical window investigators have. Evidence degrades, trails go cold, witnesses forget. The window for certain kinds of intelligence gathering narrows with every hour that passes. And according to the FBI director, his agency was locked out of this investigation for nearly twice that window, while local authorities handled things on their own terms. Patel did not stop there. He said he launched hundreds of agents to Arizona to work the case. He said that when the FBI was finally allowed in, one of the first things they were able to do was obtain the Ring doorbell footage from Google, footage that became central to everything that followed. But what Patel revealed next is the detail that had never surfaced publicly before, the detail that Brian Entin said none of his sources had ever told him. Kash Patel had a plane on standby, a fixed-wing aircraft ready to move through the night, waiting to transport the DNA evidence directly to Quantico. He said it himself. I had an aircraft. I had a fixed-wing aircraft ready to move it through the night. He wanted to take the DNA to the FBI lab at Quantico, which he described as the best DNA lab in the world. Instead, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos made the decision to send the DNA to the private lab his department uses in Florida. Brian Entin has reported on the rootless hair found inside Nancy Guthrie's home multiple times. That hair, one of the most significant pieces of physical evidence in the entire case, was first sent to the lab in Florida. It was only recently transferred to Quantico, months later, not hours, months. And if Kash Patel had his way, if the decision had gone differently that night, that hair would have been on a federal aircraft before sunrise, processed at the most advanced forensic facility in the country, with results potentially available weeks earlier than they are now. That is not a hypothetical. That is a decision that was made by a specific person with specific consequences for this investigation. The Pima County Sheriff's Office responded. Brian Entin read their full statement on air because he wanted to be fair, and it is worth understanding what they said. Sheriff Nanos is aware of Director Patel's interview. A member of the FBI task force was present at the scene, and the FBI was promptly notified. Decisions regarding evidence processing were made based on operational needs. The private laboratory and the FBI lab have worked in close partnership from the outset. They remain committed to a thorough, coordinated, fact-based investigation. That is the official position. Nothing to see here. Coordination from the beginning. 2 labs working together. But that position sits directly against what the FBI director said publicly, specifically with his name attached to it. And those two versions of events cannot both be entirely true. Kash Patel does not go on a national podcast and describe having a plane on standby and being kept out for 4 days if the coordination was seamless. Something happened in those first 4 days that created a friction between local and federal authorities that is still visible now, months later, in the gap between what the sheriff's office is saying and what the FBI director is saying. Now let's get into the behavioral analysis, because this is where the picture of this case deepens significantly. Brian Entin's 1-hour special for the CW brought together several of the most respected criminal profilers working today. Dr. Amber Burgess, whose work formed the basis for a character in Mindhunter. Dr. Gary Brucato, who has been central to the behavioral profile Brian Entin has been reporting on throughout this investigation, and Dr. Casey Jordan. What these profilers described in that special, and what retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell broke down in detail with Brian Entin, adds layers to this case that change how you look at every piece of evidence that has come before. The first major theory is one that has been building for weeks, but landed with particular weight coming from Dr. Burgess, the man on the doorbell camera, the suspect who has been the focus of this investigation since the footage was released, may be dead, not missing, not in hiding, dead, killed by whoever directed him. Because here is the logic that investigators and profilers are working from. If there is a mastermind behind this, someone who planned the operation, who understood the risks, who directed another person to carry out the physical act, that person has a problem the moment the footage goes public. The man at the door is on camera. His backpack was identified. His movements were recorded. He is a thread that leads directly back to whoever sent him. And a thread like that, in an operation this carefully planned, is not something a sophisticated actor leaves loose. Dr. Burgess put it plainly. That person may have been eliminated, killed by the boss, by the person who designed everything and had the most to lose if the man at the door was ever found and started talking. Maureen O'Connell said she had raised this possibility early in her conversations with Brian Entin, and the reasoning is straightforward. The reward in this case is $1.2 million. That is not the kind of money people stay quiet for indefinitely. If 2 people were involved and both are alive, the pressure on the one who was on camera, who is identifiable, who knows that law enforcement has his image and is actively looking for him, becomes unbearable over time. The mastermind cannot pay him more than $1.2 million. And even if they tried, the man at the door has every incentive to take the reward money instead. Unless he cannot take it. Unless he is no longer in a position to make that choice. O'Connell described the scenario clearly. The 2 of them pull off the operation. The footage goes public. The man at the door starts to panic. He starts reaching out. And from the mastermind's perspective, that contact, that escalating fear, that potential for the whole thing to unravel through one person's desperation, that is the moment the calculation changes. It becomes cleaner, simpler, and safer to eliminate the problem entirely. One person left. One person who never appeared on camera. One person who can go back to their life and wait. And if the man at the door was someone already living on the margins, someone with limited connections, someone recently released from jail, or living in a way where disappearing would not immediately trigger a missing persons investigation, that elimination becomes even less visible. He was hired for a job, he was paid, and then he was gone. And no one who mattered to the investigation knew to look for him. That is the scenario that profilers believe is not just possible, but increasingly consistent with the evidence, specifically the silence. Because the silence in this case, the complete absence of the person on that footage from any subsequent development, is itself a data point. People do not simply vanish when there is $1.2 million on the table unless they are afraid of something worse than the reward is worth, or unless they are no longer capable of collecting it. The profilers also addressed the question of whether the man on camera was acting alone or being directed. Dr. Burgess described what she called an amateur hour quality to the behavior at the door. The movements were not those of a professional. They were excessive, performative, as Maureen O'Connell put it, the double gloves, the mask, what appeared to be layers of clothing. The grabbing of the shrubbery, the gun visible at the front, the way he interacted with the camera, all of it was, in O'Connell's words, extra, way over the top, more than what the task required. And that excess, that performance, tells profilers something important. It suggests a person who was nervous, a person who was executing someone else's plan rather than their own. A person who may have been, as O'Connell suggested from the very beginning, under the influence of something. She said he looked high to her from the first time she watched the footage. Someone who gets hired to do a job they do not particularly want to do, who takes something to calm themselves down before they walk up to that door. That is not the behavior of the person who designed this operation. That is the behavior of the person who was paid to show up and follow instructions. And if that is true, then the person who designed it, the puppet master as the profilers called them, is someone with a different profile entirely, more intelligent, more controlled, more patient, someone who understood how investigations work and built a cover story designed specifically to mislead one. Someone who knew the address well enough to plan every detail of the approach. Someone in Nancy Guthrie's life, or in Savannah Guthrie's orbit, who had a reason personal enough to sustain nearly a year of planning before the night of February 1st. Dr. Brucato and the other profilers were precise about the distinction between knowing Nancy and knowing of her. Because those are two very different things, with very different implications for who investigators are looking for. The person who directed this operation may never have met Nancy Guthrie directly. They may have known of her through Savannah, through years of watching the Today Show, through some interaction with Savannah's public life that created a perception of connection that was entirely one-sided. A service worker, a driver, someone who saw Nancy on television with her daughter and formed an attachment or a grievance that had nothing to do with any real relationship, and then, at some point, found someone else to carry out what they had been planning. Jim Fitzgerald, former FBI profiler who also spoke with Brian Entin, went further. He recommended that investigators go back through years of Savannah Guthrie's emails, any correspondence sent to her or her security team looking for the connection. Because his assessment is that whoever is behind this may have first tried to reach Savannah directly, failed to get a response, and then found another way to make themselves felt, taking the person Savannah loved most in the world. The Google searches remain one of the most significant pieces of digital evidence in this entire investigation. March 2025. 11 months before the abduction, someone searched for images of Nancy Guthrie's home address. Then again between November 30th and December 1st, 2025, 60 days before she disappeared. The FBI subpoenaed Google for the IP records. That data is in investigators' hands. And what it describes is not impulsive violence. It is not a random crime of opportunity. It is patient, sustained, emotionally driven preparation that stretched across nearly a year. The kind of preparation that only makes sense if the motive is personal enough to stay with someone through 11 months of planning, research, and waiting. Maureen O'Connell was asked directly whether she considers this a cold case. Her answer was no, and the reasoning matters. Investigators are still working through years of emails. still identifying people connected to suspicious correspondence and running them down. Checking credit card records, bank withdrawals, travel history, social media, cell tower data. There are still tips in the queue that have not been fully processed. 30,000 came in initially, and more arrive every day. The number of people actively working the case has narrowed, which O'Connell said is not necessarily a bad thing. A focused task force of people who know each other, who trust each other, who challenge each other's thinking and defend their positions and push back hard, that is often more effective than a sprawling investigation where the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. The forensic genetic genealogy path is the one O'Connell believes is most likely to produce a breakthrough. It is slow. It is meticulous. It takes time in a way that frustrates everyone watching from the outside, but it is also the kind of work that cracks cases no other method can crack. The same technology that identified the Golden State Killer after decades. The DNA at Quantico, the hair that finally made it there months after Kash Patel had a plane ready to move it the night it was collected, that evidence is being processed, and when it produces a result, the question of who this is will no longer be theoretical. There was a moment in Brian Entin's conversation with Maureen O'Connell that deserves to be heard clearly. She talked about Savannah Guthrie, about the criticism that has been directed at her online for going quiet, for returning to work, for not posting weekly updates. And O'Connell pushed back on all of it. She said Savannah is utterly broken. That she is dealing with small children, a marriage, a career, and a grief that has no clean edges because there is no body, no confirmed outcome, no moment where the loss becomes official and the process of surviving it can begin. She is in limbo, and limbo is its own kind of suffering that nobody who has not lived it can fully understand from the outside. O'Connell also noted that the trauma Savannah is carrying may be compounded by something harder to name. The sense, however irrational, that this is connected to her. That because the segment she did with her mother on the Today Show brought Nancy into the public eye, she bears some responsibility for what followed. She does not. But that kind of guilt does not respond to logic. It responds to time and to answers, and right now she has neither. O'Connell also raised something that has not been widely discussed. Tommaso, Nancy's son, who lives nearby, who has largely stayed out of public view throughout this investigation. O'Connell said she thought he might be positioned to be the family's voice in a way that Savannah, given her public profile and the specific attention directed at her, simply cannot be. Not because Savannah is unwilling, but because every time she steps into public view, the story becomes about her rather than about finding her mother. Tommaso could carry that weight differently. Whether he chooses to is a separate question. But the absence of a consistent family voice has left a vacuum that the internet fills with speculation, some of it cruel, some of it directed at people who have already lost more than most people can imagine. The investigation is not cold. The FBI is not done. The behavioral profile is narrowing the field. The DNA is at Quantico. The Google subpoena data is in investigators' hands. The IP address of whoever searched for photographs of Nancy Guthrie's home 11 months before she disappeared is part of the evidence picture being built right now. And somewhere in the silence that has surrounded this case since February 1st, the weight of what was done is pressing down on the person who designed it. It does not lift. It does not fade. It builds. And the FBI is watching for exactly where and how it shows. The error is coming. It always comes. And when it does, Brian Entin will be the first to report it, and Crime Blackline Archive will break it down for you in full. If you have any information about this case, the tip line is in the description. Anonymous, no pressure, just pass it on. And if you made it this far, subscribe to Crime Blackline Archive and hit the bell. We will be back.